You're Mine Tonight. A story of stars, secrets, and survival. Part 1. The Summons. Ambassador Ethan Voss had negotiated peace treaties in war-torn capitals, brokered ceasefires between nations that had hated each other for centuries, and once talked a dictator out of launching a missile, all before breakfast. But nothing in 20 years of diplomatic service had prepared him for standing inside an airlock, watching Earth shrink behind a porthole window as an alien shuttle carried him toward the most powerful warship in the known galaxy. The Ethan Sovereign stretched across the orbital horizon like a city made of obsidian and starlight. It was 3 kilometers long, bristling with weapons that Earth scientists couldn't even classify, and it had arrived without warning 6 days ago, simply appeared in geostationary orbit above the Atlantic, silent and massive as a moon. No attack. No communication. Just presence. Then, on the 7th day, a single message arrived, translated into 47 languages simultaneously. Send your best speaker. The Empress will listen. Once. Ethan was their best speaker. He hadn't wanted to come. His hands told a different story, steady, folded neatly in his lap as the shuttle docked, because Ethan Voss never let anything show. Not fear. Not awe. Not the fact that his heart was hammering so loud he was surprised the pilot couldn't hear it. The docking bay was enormous, cathedral-like, lit in deep violet and cold silver. Alien crew members moved with efficient purpose around him, bipedal but distinctly other, taller than humans by nearly a foot, skin that held a faint iridescent quality under the ship's lighting, eyes that shifted color with emotion rather than expression. They wore their feelings in their irises. Fear was amber. Curiosity was pale green. The ones watching Ethan as he stepped off the shuttle were almost entirely green. He was exotic to them. He found that steadying, somehow. A tall officer, female, her silver uniform marking rank, escorted him through corridors that hummed faintly underfoot, as if the ship itself was alive. She didn't speak until they reached a pair of massive doors embossed with symbols Ethan's translation earpiece identified as the Imperial Seal. The Empress will address you publicly first, the officer said, her accent precise, almost musical. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not move from the designated position. You will not make direct visual contact unless she invites it. And if I break one of those rules? Ethan asked. The officer looked at him. Her eyes flickered briefly, not amber, not green. Something darker. A color his earpiece didn't have a translation for. Let us hope you don't, she said, and the doors opened. The throne chamber was full. Hundreds of alien faces turned toward him as he walked the long central aisle. At its end, elevated on a raised dais, sat the Empress of the Ethan Empire. And every thought Ethan Voss had carefully prepared dissolved the moment he saw her. She was extraordinary. Not beautiful in any human sense, or perhaps more beautiful precisely because she wasn't. Her hair was deep black threaded with what looked like living light, shifting slowly like bioluminescence caught in dark water. Her skin held that iridescent quality he'd seen in the crew, but richer, more pronounced, like the inside of an abalone shell given human form. She was tall even seated, wearing a fitted obsidian garment that left her collarbones and the long elegant lines of her neck bare. Her eyes, when they settled on him, were a deep, steady gold. Not curious. Not afraid. Calculating. She studied him the way Ethan studied treaty documents, looking for the hidden clause, the buried leverage, the thing that would determine everything. Ambassador Voss, she said at last. Her voice carried without effort, low and resonant, and his earpiece translated the words half a breath after her lips formed them. You are smaller than I expected. Quiet laughter moved through the chamber. Ethan stopped walking. Let the laughter settle. Then he said, calmly, You're larger than I expected, Empress. I'll adjust. The laughter stopped. Her golden eyes didn't change expression, but something in them shifted, subtle as a tide turning. We will speak, she said. Tonight. The public session lasted 4 hours. Ethan presented Earth's position, coexistence, mutual non-aggression, trade framework, clearly and without flinching, even as the Empress's advisors interrogated every point. She herself said little, watching him the entire time with those gold, unreadable eyes. When it ended, he was escorted back to a guest chamber, given food he couldn't entirely identify but ate anyway because diplomacy required adaptability, and told to rest. He was still awake, sitting on the edge of the sleeping platform and reviewing his notes, when the door chimed. The silver-uniformed officer from before stood in the corridor. The Empress summons you, she said. No explanation. No apology for the hour. Ethan set down his notes, straightened his jacket, and followed. They walked deeper into the ship, past guarded junctions, through a corridor that grew quieter and more isolated with every turn, until they reached a single door, smaller than the throne room entrance but somehow more imposing. The officer pressed her palm to a sensor panel and stepped back. "Her personal chamber," she said. "Go." Ethan stepped inside. The door sealed behind him with a soft, definitive metallic hiss. The room was dim, lit in deep amber, and the faint glow of star maps projected across one curved wall. The Empress stood with her back to him, looking out at the stars through a wide viewport, still in her dark garments, her luminescent hair loose now and falling past her shoulders. She didn't turn immediately. Then, quietly, into the silence of the sealed room, she said, "You're mine tonight." Ethan's first instinct was professional. Assess the threat, manage the response, don't show alarm. His second instinct, approximately 1 second later, was considerably less professional. She was an empress. He was sealed in her private chamber. And she had just said "you're mine tonight" in a voice that was barely above a whisper but filled the room completely. He kept his expression even. "I wasn't aware that was part of the negotiation terms." She turned then, and for the first time since the throne room, he saw her face without the distance of politics between them. The amber lighting caught the iridescence of her skin differently here, warmer, more human somehow, though she was anything but. "You think this is a threat," she said. "I think it's a statement I don't have enough context to classify," Ethan replied carefully. "Which is, in my experience, the most dangerous kind." She studied him for a long moment. Then something crossed her face, not quite a smile, but the architecture of one, something around the corners of her mouth that suggested she had found something unexpectedly interesting. "Sit down, Ambassador." He chose the chair nearest to him, not the closest to her, not the farthest. Neutral positioning. She noticed. He could tell by the way her eyes tracked his choice. She sat across from him, folding herself into the opposite chair with a grace that seemed unconscious, and for a moment they simply regarded each other in the amberlit silence. "In your language," she began, "possession and protection are different things." "Usually," Ethan said. "In mine, they are the same word. The same concept." She paused, letting that land. "When I say you are mine, I am not claiming ownership. I am claiming responsibility. I am telling my empire, my court, my guard, every faction that watches what I do, that your safety is now bound to my honor." Her golden eyes held his steadily. "If you are harmed, I am dishonoured. And no one in this empire dishonours me." Ethan was quiet for 3 seconds, which was, for him, a very long time. "There's a faction that wants Earth destroyed," he said. "Not a question." "There is always a faction that wants something destroyed," she answered. "This one is patient and well-connected and has been watching your planet for longer than your civilization has had written language. They consider Earth an infestation waiting to be managed." She said it with a flat, clinical quality that was somehow more chilling than anger would have been. "They also consider you, specifically, a liability. A human diplomat clever enough to walk onto the ship and not flinch is a human diplomat clever enough to make coexistence seem possible. That is dangerous to their agenda. So they'll try to kill me. They already have tried, twice, since you came aboard." She watched his expression. "You weren't in danger. My personal guard intercepted both attempts before you were aware of them. But they will not stop." Ethan leaned back in his chair slowly, processing this with the deliberate calm of a man who had learned long ago that panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. "And by claiming me as yours, publicly, I make you untouchable by their hands," she said. "An attack on you becomes an attack on me. And they are not yet prepared for that war." A pause. "I said it in the throne room, at the close of session. Every advisor, every faction representative in that chamber heard it. It is already transmitted across my empire." He hadn't caught it. The translation earpiece, she'd said something in her own language at the closing, something the earpiece had rendered as a formal closing phrase. Closing ceremony words, he'd assumed. "What exactly did you say?" he asked. "That you walk tonight under imperial protection." She met his eyes. "That you are mine." The words settled differently this time. Not threatening, something else. Something that moved through him with unexpected warmth, which he filed away to examine critically later when he had privacy and perspective. Why? He asked. Why protect me? Why does Earth matter to you? She was quiet for a moment. The star maps on the curved wall shifted slowly, the galaxy rotating in patient silence above them. Because I have seen what my empire does to civilizations it decides are inconvenient, she said at last, and something in her voice changed, not softer exactly, but older. Like something she'd been carrying for a long time and rarely set down. I have seen planets silenced. I am not, she stopped. Started again. I am Empress. But there are things even an Empress must build carefully. Coalition by coalition. Precedent by precedent. Her gold eyes found his. Your survival tonight is not only about Earth. It is about establishing that I decide what falls under my protection. Not the factions. Not the Council. Me. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. You're using me. Yes, she said simply. And I am keeping you alive. In my experience, both things can be true simultaneously. Despite everything, the sealed door, the assassins outside, the staggering weight of what was happening, Ethan felt the corner of his mouth move. Not quite a smile. But close. In my experience too, he said. She looked at the near smile on his face. Her golden eyes shifted, just barely, just at the edges, to something lighter. Something almost warm. There is food, she said, gesturing toward a low table he hadn't noticed, set with several covered dishes. We have until morning. And I would, another pause, more careful this time. I would know more about the man I have staked my reputation on. Ethan settled back into his chair. Outside the sealed door, somewhere in the silent corridors of the most powerful warship in the known galaxy, people wanted him dead. Inside this amberlit room, an alien empress was asking him to talk. He had always been better at talking than running. Ask me anything, he said. Her name, she told him, was Viella. Not Empress, not Your Grace, Viella. She offered it with the same directness she'd offered everything else, as if she'd decided somewhere in the last hour that pretense was inefficient between them. Does that mean something? He asked. In your language. All names mean something in my language. She poured something from a tall vessel into two narrow glasses, deep blue, slightly luminescent. Viella means the space between two stars. The dark that is not empty, that holds things in place without being seen. She set one glass near his hand. Ethan looked at it, then at her. It won't harm you, she said. It will make you warm. Slightly euphoric. Nothing you cannot manage. A measured pause. I thought you might need it. He picked it up. It tasted like nothing he had a reference for, sweet in a frequency his tongue hadn't previously registered, warm going down, spreading through his chest like the first honest exhale after holding your breath too long. It's good, he said, and meant it. Viella watched him drink with those gold eyes, and for a moment the formidable architecture of her, the empress, the strategist, seemed to recede slightly, like a tide pulling back to reveal something quieter underneath. Tell me about your work, she said. What does a diplomat believe in? Underneath the negotiation. Nobody had ever asked him that. In 20 years of treaties and ceasefires and rooms full of powerful people saying careful things, nobody had ever stripped it back to that question. He found himself answering it. He told her about his father, a translator who'd believed that every language was a door, and that most wars happened because people knocked on the wrong side. He told her about the first negotiation he'd ever walked out of, a failure, catastrophic, 2 nations that went to war 3 weeks later, and how he'd sat in a hotel room in a city he couldn't name anymore and decided that failure wasn't the opposite of peace, it was part of the process of finding it. He told her about the things that kept him doing this, the small, unrecorded moments, a handshake across a table that had no cameras, a conversation that changed something quietly and permanently that no one would ever write a headline about. Viella listened to all of it without interrupting. She was extraordinarily still when she listened, not passive, but present, in a way that most humans never managed. Her eyes didn't wander. She didn't reach for her glass. She simply attended to him, completely, and he became aware somewhere in the telling that he was being genuinely heard, perhaps more fully than he'd been heard in years. You love it, she said when he finished. Not the power of it. The contact. The moment when 2 minds meet across something that was supposed to divide them. Yes, Ethan said. Exactly that. She looked at him for a long, still moment. Then, I have not spoken to anyone this way in 4 years. He didn't ask why. The answer lived in the spaces of everything she'd already said: the empire, the factions, the weight of a throne that required her to be untouchable at all times. The loneliness of that was something he recognized in a quieter, less dramatic register from his own life. The hotel rooms. The celebrated negotiations. The complete absence of anyone who asked what he believed in underneath. 4 years is a long time, he said. Yes, she agreed. Just that. Somewhere in the third hour, the ship shuddered. Not dramatically, a single, deep vibration, like a bass note, felt through the floor rather than heard. Both of them stilled. Viola's eyes shifted, the gold sharpening, intensifying, a color that his earpiece hadn't categorized but that he was beginning to understand meant readiness. She was at the door panel before he fully processed that she'd moved, her hand hovering over a set of controls with the practiced ease of someone who had been in danger before and found it clarifying rather than paralyzing. "Stay back from the door," she said quietly. "What was that?" "A pressure test." Her fingers moved across the panel. "Someone tested the seal on this corridor, checking whether the guards have shifted." A pause while data scrolled across the panel surface. "They have not. We are secure." She turned back to him, and for a moment she was simply Viola, not Empress, standing in the amber light with her luminescent hair loose and her gold eyes carrying the specific exhaustion of someone who had been fighting battles most people couldn't see for a very long time. Something in Ethan moved toward that without his permission. He crossed the room. Stopped close, not touching, not quite, close enough that she would have to tilt her head to meet his eyes, which she did. Up close, the iridescence of her skin was extraordinary. Faint colors moved through it like light through water. "You're tired," he said quietly. She didn't deny it, which told him something. "The faction will move before morning," she said. "They'll make a formal challenge in the council session at dawn, claim I've compromised Imperial security by harboring a human diplomat in my private chamber. They'll use it." Her voice was steady, but he was close enough now to see something in her jaw, something held very carefully in place. "I prepared for this. It doesn't make it simple." "What do you need?" Ethan asked. "Not strategically. Right now. In this room." She looked at him for a long moment. Something behind her golden eyes moved, slow and uncertain, like something that had been still for a very long time considering whether to. "I need someone to stand next to me," she said finally. "Without agenda. Just next to me." Ethan stepped forward the remaining inch and a half and stood beside her, shoulder beside her arm. The geometry slightly awkward given the height difference, but real. Present. She was still for a moment, and then he felt something in her posture change, just slightly, the barest degree of release, like a bowstring allowed to ease. They stood together in the amber light, looking out at the stars through the viewport. Outside the sealed door, the night was full of danger. Inside, for a little while, it was simply quiet. They didn't sleep. Ethan didn't suggest it and Viola didn't offer it. There was too much at stake and they both knew it, and besides, neither of them seemed particularly inclined toward the mundane act of unconsciousness when the alternative was this: the two of them cross-legged on opposite sides of the low table, star maps rotating overhead, trading the kind of conversation that only happens in sealed rooms in the deep hours when ordinary pretense has run out of energy and something more essential takes its place. She told him about the 7 systems under her empire. Not the political geography, the actual systems, the ones that didn't appear in the diplomatic briefings his government had compiled. The water world that had been dying for 3 centuries from a slow mineral depletion that her scientists were still attempting to reverse. The binary star civilization that had joined the empire voluntarily and then spent the next 100 years regretting it quietly in ways she was still trying to address. The faction, this faction, that had originally been a legitimate reform movement and had calcified, over decades, into something that used the language of protection as cover for elimination. "How long have you been fighting them?" Ethan asked. "Since before I was Empress," Viola said. "My predecessor tried accommodation, gave them council seats, included their representatives in expansion decisions." She was quiet for a moment. "You know what accommodation does to something that fundamentally believes in its own supremacy." "It feeds it," Ethan said. "It feeds it," she agreed. Her gold eyes held something dark and old. "I am not interested in accommodation. I am interested in building something that outlasts them." "Is that what tonight is?" "Tonight is one tile in a larger mosaic." She looked at him directly. "But yes." Around the 4th hour, A soft chime sounded from the door panel. Viola rose fluidly and answered it, a brief, murmured exchange in her own language that his earpiece translated partially. Confirmed. 2 intercepted. Dawn session still scheduled. She returned and sat back down, and her expression had shifted. Something had resolved in it, become more decided. 2 more attempts, she said. Both stopped by my guard. The faction is becoming less subtle, which means they're becoming less confident. The architecture of a smile, closer to the real thing now. Good. Ethan was quiet for a moment, looking at her across the low table, across the empty glasses and the slowly rotating star maps. He was thinking about something she'd said in the first hour. I have not spoken to anyone this way in 4 years. He was thinking about what it cost, the specific kind of isolation that power imposed on people who were also, underneath, simply people. He was also, in the way of a man who has spent a night in ambulate conversation with someone extraordinary, thinking about things that were significantly less political. Can I ask you something personal? He said. Her eyes shifted, not amber, not green. That other color again. You have been asking me personal things for 4 hours, Ambassador. Ethan, he said, since we are apparently bound together by imperial law until morning, you might as well. Something in her expression changed, unmistakably, this time. The near smile became briefly, genuinely real. It transformed her face entirely, made her look younger and more dangerous simultaneously. Ethan, she repeated, as if testing the word. What is your question? Do you want any of this? He asked. The empire. The throne. If you could choose. No one who sits on a throne chose it freely, she said. They chose the alternative, which was someone else sitting on it who would do far more harm. A pause. So yes. I want it. The same way you want difficult negotiations, not because they are pleasant, but because they matter. That's the most human thing you've said all night. Her gold eyes regarded him steadily. Perhaps that is why I summoned you. The space between them had been shifting incrementally for hours, not dramatically, not with any particular decision, but with the slow gravitational quality of 2 things that have been orbiting each other for long enough to notice. By the 4th hour they were sitting beside each other rather than across, the low table pushed aside at some point during a particularly animated exchange about political theory, and by the time the first faint change in the ship's ambient lighting indicated the approach of whatever cycle counted as dawn aboard the Ethan Sovereign, Viola's hand was resting near his on the cushioned floor, close enough that he was deeply and specifically aware of the proximity. He turned his hand over. She looked at it for a long moment, and then placed hers in it, palm to palm, her fingers long and cool against his. She studied the contrast with an expression he was learning to read. Not alien assessment, but something much more familiar. Wondering, a little. Uncertain in a way she probably wasn't often. Your skin is warm, she said quietly. Yours is cool, he said. It's not unpleasant. They sat like that as the ship's lighting gradually shifted, amber deepening briefly before beginning to lift, their hands connected in the middle of the night they'd shared, while outside the door the Empire held its breath and waited for morning. Ethan, she said quietly. Not a question. Just his name, placed carefully, like she was deciding whether to keep it. He turned to look at her, and she was closer than he'd quite tracked, her gold eyes at near range, the bioluminescence of her hair catching the lifting light. What passed between them in the next few minutes was not something that appeared in any diplomatic record. It was unhurried and genuine, and held the particular quality of things that happen between 2 people who have talked through the night and arrived somewhere unplanned. A long moment where their foreheads touched first, and she exhaled slowly, and he felt her hand close more firmly around his, and then everything that followed was quiet and certain and warm in the specific, particular way of 2 people who were, despite all logic and distance and the 1,000 categories of difference between them, paying very close attention to each other. When the formal dawn chime sounded, they were still close, her head resting against his shoulder, his chin resting lightly against the top of her luminescent hair, both of them looking at the stars through the viewport. You have a decision to make, she said quietly. I know, he said. The council session convened at dawn with the cold, formal efficiency of an empire that ran on precision. The chamber was the same vast space where Ethan had walked the long aisle the day before, but the atmosphere was entirely different, charged, watchful, the factions arranged on opposite sides of the curved-tiered seating like a storm that had finished gathering and was deciding whether to break. Viola walked in ahead of him, alone first, taking her elevated position with the particular quality of stillness that he now recognized as her version of readiness. She wore deep silver today, different from yesterday's obsidian, deliberate. Every choice she made was deliberate. Ethan had asked her about it in the last quiet minutes before they'd prepared for this. Silver is the color of claimed territory, she told him. In my culture. Things I have already decided about. He walked in 30 seconds after her, which was her instruction. Alone, visibly unharmed, in the clothes he'd arrived in, human, clearly, obviously himself, without any attempt to minimize or apologize for that fact. The faction's lead representative, a tall male with amber-shifted eyes, which Ethan now knew meant fear dressed up as authority, rose immediately. His challenge was formal, structured, delivered in Viola's language with his earpiece 3 beats behind. Security breach, protocol violation, imperial compromise, the human diplomat must be removed and the matter investigated. The matter is settled, Viola said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The ambassador walked under my personal protection through the night. He is unharmed. He stands before this council at dawn as agreed. The factions attempted interceptions, a slight pause that was as close to devastating as anything Ethan had ever witnessed. Both of them are logged in my security record and available for full council review. The amber in the representative's eyes deepened. The question before this council, Viola continued, is not what happened in my chamber. The question is what happens next. Her gold eyes moved across the assembled faces with the slow precision of someone who had been counting votes for years. Earth has sent us their best speaker. I have spoken with him. I am prepared to move forward with a coexistence framework, trade access, mutual non-aggression, and a formal research exchange. A pause. Those who oppose this may register their opposition through the appropriate legislative channels. Another pause, lighter, with that trace of dangerous near smile. I look forward to the debate. The session lasted 3 hours. Ethan spoke twice, once to present Earth's terms formally for the record, and once, near the end, when a faction representative asked him directly why humans deserve consideration from a civilization that had outpaced them by millennia. He didn't answer with geopolitics. He answered with the thing Viola had drawn out of him in the amber at night, the thing underneath the negotiation. Because being more advanced doesn't mean being more right, he said. Every civilization you've encountered started somewhere smaller. What you do with the ones who are still small, that's what actually tells you who you are. The chamber was very quiet after that. Viola didn't look at him, but he saw her hand, resting on the arm of her elevated chair, close very slightly. The shuttle back to Earth was scheduled for 2 hours after the session closed. Viola met him at the docking bay, not the throne room version of her, not the council version, but something closer to the one he'd sat beside in the amberlit quiet, the one with her hair loose and her gold eyes carrying that older, more careful exhaustion. The framework will take 18 months to ratify through the imperial legislature, she said. There will be complications. There always are, Ethan said. The faction will regroup. A pause. They will try again. I know. She was quiet for a moment. The docking bay hummed around them, crew members moving with deliberate disinterest in the background, giving them space, he realized, because she'd asked for it. You could remain, she said. It was offered carefully. Not as command, not as empress, as Viola. As formal diplomatic liaison. Earth would need a permanent representative. The position would require someone with considerable tolerance for complexity. Ethan looked at her. At the extraordinary, difficult, brilliant person standing before him who had spent a night keeping him alive and had somewhere in the process of that done something much harder to define. If I stay, he said, it's not as a liaison. Her golden eyes held his steadily. No, she agreed. It would not be. He thought about hotel rooms. He thought about ceasefires nobody photographed. He thought about his father, who believed that every language was a door, and that the most important doors were the ones that scared you most to open. He thought about a hand, cool against his palm, closing more firmly in the dark. I'll need to make a call to Earth, he said. Let them know the negotiation has entered an extended phase. Something moved through Viola's expression, slow, genuine, the full version of the near smile finally arriving. It changed her face entirely, and he decided, watching it, that it was the most extraordinary thing he had seen in 20 years of witnessing extraordinary things. I will have a communication line opened, she said. He nodded once. Then, Viola. She looked at him. Thank you for the protection, he said. I'd like to return the favor. She studied him for a long, measured moment. Then she turned and walked back toward the heart of a ship, and he fell into step beside her, not behind, not in front, beside, at the exact position that felt, despite everything, like the place he'd been walking toward for 20 years without knowing the destination. The shuttle bay doors closed behind them. Earth continued to turn, far below, blue and small and waiting. Above it, on a ship made of obsidian and starlight, two people who had no business finding each other walked together into whatever came next, which was complicated and uncertain and full of danger. Which was, they both understood perfectly, another word for beginning. End.